Well, now the phrase trumped up charges has new meaning. Donald Trump has delivered what is literally the thinnest federal indictment you will ever see. It amounts to 2 pages only because the 2 counts, so-called, in this thin indictment are the same count, the same so-called crime, which we will show you in a moment, James Comey's testimony to the Senate. And so they use that same sentence that James Comey gave in his testimony to create these 2 different so-called counts. The first count is what this indictment calls that he made materially false and fictitious fraudulent statement to the United States Senate. That is not something that Donald Trump has ever taken seriously before now. And then they use that same so-called false statement to constitute an obstruction charge, obstruction of the United States Senate. That's what this indictment is. We've literally never seen anything like it in any way, either one of those counts. James Comey responded to the indictment tonight with this video.
They're building a 90,000 square foot ballroom, destroying the East Wing of the White House, which belongs to us, the People's House. And then they're launching the vodka company while Eric Trump was making his rounds yesterday, not just only announcing that, but this is what the Trump regime was pushing yesterday. Donald Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize so many times over, and Mount Rushmore.
All right, so you are not going to believe this. Trumped up charges finally went literal. The current president just delivered what might be the thinnest federal indictment in modern history. 2 counts cut and paste from the same single sentence of James Comey's Senate testimony. I mean, it's so flimsy you could read the whole thing during the YouTube pre-roll. And yes, it's real. The Eastern District of Virginia posted the press release. ABC News put the arraignment date on the calendar, and the Guardian's live page has the basic charge sheet. This is not rumor, this is paper. Here's the setup. After weeks of the president publicly demanding prosecutions, career prosecutors reportedly wrote a memo arguing against charging Comey. The statute of limitations on a lying to Congress theory was seconds from expiring. The sitting U.S. attorney in Eddie VA was pushed out. A loyalist with 0 federal trial experience, Lindsay Halligan, was installed. Then, right before the buzzer, a grand jury handed up an indictment alleging one supposed false statement and then, wait for it, treating that same supposed statement as obstruction of Congress. CBS says House Judiciary Democrats are already probing the Siebert ouster that cleared the lane. Reuters has the White House line that DOJ decides, while the timing tells a louder story than any podium can.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
When James Comey referred to his family in that statement, he obviously is including his daughter, Maureen Comey, former federal prosecutor who was fired by Donald Trump and Donald Trump's Justice Department. She was the lead prosecutor in the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution. She is the federal prosecutor who knew more about Ghislaine Maxwell and her prosecution than anyone else, and Ghislaine Maxwell's co-conspirator in sex trafficking, Jeffrey Epstein. Donald Trump made sure that she was fired before Donald Trump sent his criminal defense lawyer, his personal criminal defense lawyer, to Florida to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, now that Donald Trump's personal criminal defense lawyer is his deputy attorney general. He had to make sure that Maureen Comey was out of the way before he did that. That's one of the people James Comey referred to tonight in that video statement, and that quote, that line that he used Fear is the tool of a tyrant, is what his daughter, Maureen Comey, said when she was fired by the Justice Department in an email to her colleagues. She said, if a career prosecutor can be fired without reason, fear may seep into the decisions of those who remain. Do not let that happen. Fear is the tool of a tyrant, wielded to suppress independent thought. Instead of fear, let this moment fuel the fire that already burns at the heart of this place. A fire of righteous indignation at abuses of power, of commitment to seek justice for victims, of dedication to truth above all else. Donald Trump does not often delete social media posts. That is the rarest thing Donald Trump can do with a social media post, but he did it. He did it with the social media post in which he ordered his attorney general to bring this prosecution to his attorney general publicly. Pam, I have reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time, all talk, no action, nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell. And there is Donald Trump pronouncing guilt on James Comey while he's ordering his attorney general to make James Comey a criminal defendant. There's Donald Trump telling all of those grand jurors who heard this case, all of them, that James Comey is guilty as hell. That's Donald Trump telling the entire jury pool that will be considered for this case in the Eastern District of Virginia, that James Comey is guilty as hell. That is something that no president has ever done before Donald Trump. There was a moment when President Richard Nixon let slip publicly that he thought Charles Manson was guilty of those mass murders in Los Angeles, and President Nixon had to immediately retract that in a statement in writing for fear that that would create a mistrial in the prosecution of Charles Manson, and for fear that that would create prejudicial publicity that could harm Charles Manson ever getting a free trial, a fair trial in this country. Donald Trump has thrown that convention aside with his declaration that James Comey was guilty before James Comey was indicted. This is now all about this exchange that James Comey had with Senator Rafael Cruz in the Senate Judiciary Committee almost exactly 5 years ago tonight. Here is that exchange in its entirety. This is the entire body of evidence in this case. Here it is.
On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, "Have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?" You responded under oath, quote, "Never." He then asked you, quote, "Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration?" You responded again under oath, "No." Now, as you know, Mr. McCabe, who works for you, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal and that you were directly aware of it and that you directly authorized it. Now, what Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
So your testimony is you've never authorized anyone to leak. And Mr. McCabe, if he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
The problem for Donald Trump and his inexperienced new prosecutor leading this prosecution is that the Department of Justice, in their Inspector General's investigation of this exact issue, found that James Comey was indeed telling the truth. Here is what the Inspector General's report has to say about exactly what Senator Cruz was just asking about. The Inspector General says, "We found that in late October 2016, McCabe authorized special counsel to discuss with Wall Street Journal reporter Devlin Barrett issues related to the FBI's Clinton Foundation investigation. So there's the Inspector General report saying, we found that McCabe authorized the discussion with the Wall Street Journal. McCabe authorized those two words. The jury in this case is going to see those two words. The grand jury in this case is very unlikely to ever have been presented with a single word of what you're about to hear right now. It is very unlikely that they ever showed the grand jury in this case the Inspector General's report, which goes on to say, in particular, McCabe authorized special counsel to disclose to Barrett the contents of a telephone call that had occurred on August 12, 2016, between McCabe and then Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. We found that in a conversation with then Director Comey shortly after the Wall Street Journal article was published, McCabe lacked candor when he told Comey or made statements that led Comey to believe that McCabe had not authorized the disclosure and did not know who did. We also found that on May 9th, 2017, when questioned under oath by FBI agents from the Inspector General's office, McCabe lacked candor when he told the agents that he had not authorized the disclosure to the Wall Street Journal and did not know who did. We additionally found that on November 29, 2017, when questioned under oath by the Inspector General in a recorded interview during which he contradicted his prior statements by acknowledging that he had authorized the disclosure to the Wall Street Journal, McCabe lacked candor when he stated that he told Comey on October 31st, 2016, that he had authorized the disclosure to the Wall Street Journal. And so there is the evidence that was no doubt withheld and deliberately withheld from this grand jury. It is inconceivable that a grand jury could read those passages of the Inspector General's report and then say that James Comey was somehow not telling the truth.
Comey's response landed like a closing argument. Calm, direct, I'm innocent, let's have a trial. And here's where the facts punch through the fog. The Department of Justice's own Inspector General, in black and white, found that Andrew McCabe authorized the Wall Street Journal disclosure at issue and then lacked candor, including about whether he told Comey he'd done it. Translation, the core contradiction that Cruz waved around in that hearing years ago was resolved by the watchdog in Comey's favor. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. The OIG report literally says McCabe authorized the disclosure and lacked candor to Comey about it. That is the opposite of Comey lied. Axios Contemporaneous Summary and Lawfare's Archive both point to the same lines. If the grand jury never saw those pages, that is not an accident, that is a strategy. And because nothing with this crowd happens in ones, the personnel plotline is a whole other show. AP and local outlets track the chaos around EDVA. Eric Siebert is out, Lindsay Halligan is in. Senator Tim Kaine is already questioning whether the president can even keep appointing interim U.S. attorneys in that district without judges stepping in, which matters because EDVA touches the Pentagon and CIA and is not the place to learn on the job. CBS's Scott MacFarlane says House Democrats are now investigating the Siebert removal. This is why MSNBC's Ken Delanian has been yelling about the statute window. You don't have to be a cynic to see the through line. You just have to own a calendar. Meanwhile, the president did the most Trump thing possible and deleted a social post naming and declaring Comey guilty as hell at the exact moment he was ordering his DOJ to make Comey a defendant. I cannot stress how bonkers that is for a jury pool. Nixon once blurted that Charles Manson was guilty and had to retract it immediately to avoid nuking the trial. This president just hits send, deletes later, then pretends it's all normal. ABC's Timeline pins the post. The AP write-through on the indictment aftermath even got the family fallout, with Comey's son-in-law resigning from EDVA minutes after the news crossed, citing the Constitution. That's not deep state. That's a man who knows what a courtroom looks like. Let's talk about the law for a sec, because the legal nerds in chat are already typing. False statements, 18 U.S.C. Perf. 1001, take more than a vibe. You need a provably false material statement, not answered with hedging or lack of memory, and the government has to show it wasn't just wrong, it was knowingly wrong. Then they stacked obstruction on the same sentence by reframing testimony in a hearing as corruptly impeding the Senate. It is not unheard of to pair charges like that, but doing it on one contested exchange that the DOJ's own watchdog undercuts is, how do I say this politely, ambitious. If a judge smells selective prosecution or politically induced grandstanding, this thing will fold like a lawn chair in a windstorm. I know what some of you are yelling. What about the rest? Didn't Fox say DOJ was moving on Comey no matter what? Yes, Fox floated indictment imminent for days, which aged into today's reality, but the evidentiary spine still lives and dies on the OIG record. CNN will frame it as retaliatory. MSNBC has Ken's memo scoop. ABC has the arraignment date. The Daily Mail will find a picture of Comey looking tired and print it like a mugshot. The facts don't change across the outlets, only the adjectives. That's the tell. While all that was cooking, the week's other symbol got yanked off the board. An artist collective installed a bronze-painted statue on the National Mall of Trump and Jeffrey Epstein holding hands with a permit into Sunday night. The National Park Service removed it a day later for permit non-compliance and refused to specify which term was violated. The Washington Post has the paperwork timeline. The Guardian calls out the permit window. Local press says a reinstallation request was denied. You don't have to like the art to see the pattern. When the image hurts, the rule gets blurry. When the words hurt, the law gets flexible. When the target laughs on ABC, the affiliates go dark. That's how power behaves when it's fragile. Also, yes, the UN saga is still ridiculous. Reuters printed the president's all-caps demand for arrests over a stopped escalator and a stone-cold dark teleprompter. Then the UN, like a patient kindergarten teacher, explained that a safety sensor probably tripped because a videographer walked backward at the top while filming and reminded everyone the teleprompter belongs to the White House. The Washington Post echoes the same. So, in the same breath as he calls climate action the greatest con job ever, he is arguing with gravity and escalator safety. Not the flex you think it is. Back to the indictment, because the real stakes aren't just whether James Comey wins a motion to dismiss, it's what this does to hundreds of ordinary cases where FBI agents testify and AUSAs ask jurors to trust the process. If you are a defense attorney tomorrow, you hold up this circus and say, "See, the president uses prosecutors like a personal bat. Reasonable doubt, Your Honor. Judges will try to firewall it. Juries will hear it anyway. That's why career people wrote a don't charge memo, why a veteran U.S. attorney balked, and why Lindsay Halligan's signature is on a 2-page glass house. It isn't about one defendant. It's about whether the building still has walls. So where does this land? Comey says, "Take me to trial." The paper on his side is the DOJ's own inspector general. The paper on their side is a rushed 2-count charging sheet stapled to the same contested sentence. The judge is going to see the timing, the ouster, the interim appointment questions, the presidential declarations of guilt, the deleted post, and the OIG quotes. Prosecutors still have to walk into a courtroom where rules matter and prove material falsity and corrupt intent beyond a reasonable doubt. I would not bet your lunch money on this holding up. I would bet your patience that it will clog the news cycle until it quietly collapses. All right, YouTube, your turn. If you want more breakdowns where we pull the filings and the receipts in real time, subscribe to America Facticity right now and hit like so the algorithm knows you prefer facts with jokes. Drop trumped up in the comments if you clocked how they turned one sentence into 2 counts. Tell me whether you want tomorrow's deep dive to unpack the OIG report line by line or trace the EDVA shuffle that made this possible. Type OIG or shuffle and I'll go where you send me. And if you've got a 20-word closing line for Comey's first day in court, funniest one gets pinned. According to ABC News and the Justice Department's own press release, Comey has been indicted on 2 counts tied to one hearing exchange in federal court in Alexandria, with an arraignment date already set. According to Reuters, the president says DOJ decides, but the timing and the public declarations of guilt tell their own story. According to the DOJ Inspector General's report, Andrew McCabe authorized the disclosure at issue and lacked candor to Comey about it, which undercuts the government's core theory that Comey lied. According to the Washington Post and the Guardian, the Trump-Epstein statue had a valid permit window and was still removed early for a vague non-compliance. According to AP and CBS, the personnel shakeup that enabled this indictment is already under congressional scrutiny. That's CNN, MSNBC, ABC, Fox World Chatter, The Trades, And yes, even the Daily Mail's SEO circus if you're feeling brave. We checked the facts first, then we roasted them. Now we see if the law still remembers how to work.
And remember, if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button.